God made you with a purpose. I remember when I was in college, it was difficult for me to wake up in the mornings, especially for an 8 a.m. No one ever wanted an 8 a.m. On a Monday especially, and it was almost unthinkable to have one on a Friday, especially at A&M where I went to college, because we were going to go out to Harry's and we were going to dance late into the night. Gig 'em. But why? Why is it hard to get up in the morning? And I know multiple times in my life when I've wrestled with this question, like, why get up? Why get up? For school? That doesn't seem like a very strong reason. At least for me, it wasn't. So why get up? What's your purpose? I've wrestled with this question multiple times, and it ultimately comes down to this. What is your purpose? What is your purpose? What's your why? St. Thomas Aquinas says that the final cause is ultimately the first cause. And what that's to say is that the purpose, the end, the reason why, is going to be the first cause of any movement. Why are you going to get up in the morning? Well, what's the end of the day? What's the purpose of the day? What's your purpose? Brothers and sisters, this is good news. That God made you with a purpose, and He intends for you to fulfill it. The Catechism says that out of God's abundant goodness and generosity, He created man to share in His own divine life. You were made with a purpose, and in Genesis 1 and 2, God states that purpose. In Genesis 2:15 it says, God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. He made man to till and keep the garden. And this is a repetition of God's first commandment from Genesis 1, when it says, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and have dominion. We can match these two verses and see a parallel. That to till and to keep parallels to be fruitful and multiply and have dominion. So first, to till the garden. This is like Cain's occupation in the beginning, to be a farmer, right? He's tearing up the land, he's planting seeds, he's cultivating his garden. And what's his purpose? Well, as a farmer, to bear much fruit. To bear much fruit, to be fruitful. Therefore, fruitfulness is one of our purposes in life. And how are we fruitful today? Well, we're called to many vocations, to do many things, to be fruitful in many ways. But I think it comes down to St. Therese. What is her vocation and what's your vocation? It's this greater vocation to love. Whether you're single, married, consecrated, a priest, you're called to a vocation of love. And this is the primary spiritual fruitfulness that we're all called to love. But in Genesis 1, he's also saying, God is saying, to multiply and fill the earth. And so there's even a natural fruitfulness, a fruitfulness that happens in the fruitfulness of a vowed, married vocation to have children. God blesses the sexual union in marriage. He blesses sex. And He says it's good. Why does He say it's good? Well, He made you good. And He wants more of you. He wants you to fill the earth. He wants many of you. And so there's a spiritual fruitfulness, there's a natural fruitfulness. And within all of that, I think we can consider, what is the fruitfulness of being a father and the fruitfulness of being a mother? And how am I called to love my children and raise my children to be saints? In whatever vocation, priests are called to spiritual fatherhood, sisters, nuns are called to spiritual motherhood. But I think there's an encouragement here and a purpose of fruitfulness to raise saints. How can they live a life in Christ? Because ultimately, apart from the vine, there's no fruit. Secondly, there's a vocation to dominion. And God calls us to be lords over the earth. calls us to be lords over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, every living thing that moves upon the earth. He wants us to have dominion. And here I want to speak especially to the men, that God made you strong. And He made you strong for a reason. He made you to be a protector and a defender, a warrior even, a warrior that protects and defends the weak and the oppressed. By your very design, you're called to a particular mission, that you would fulfill your masculinity in having dominion, ultimately as a father. And so God has given us dominion, and God has called us to be fruitful. And this points to the fact that God has given you individually a purpose to fulfill in your life. I have plans for you, plans of hope, plans for a future, for your welfare, God says in Jeremiah 29:11. And so I close with this question. Since God has entrusted you with much, are you being a good steward of your life? Because you were created with a mission, a purpose. How will you fulfill your mission? So I invite you to take time in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament and adoration if you can. And I want you to ask your Father these questions. Father, how have you made me? How are you calling me to be fruitful? How are you calling me to have dominion? How are you calling me to till and keep your garden, the garden you've entrusted to me? And then with whatever He says, I encourage you to step out in faith, to wake up in the morning excited to fulfill your mission and to fulfill your purpose.